What's up, everyone, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Jonah White. I'm an apocalyptic indie author. So today I'm going to be continuing the Journey to Publication series by talking about how to make better characters in both one and done stories as well as like large series. So this is sort of like a part 2 video from last week's video where I talked about like how to plan a series, but in that I kind of mainly talked about like the plot in your story, what to do and how to plan those that story throughout the series, whereas this week I'm going to be talking about the characters in a series and also like standalone books, because I feel like both go hand in hand, and I don't feel like making two separate videos talking about like standalone books and series. So I'm going to be putting all the content into this one video. So if you haven't already, before we get on to the video, feel free to like and subscribe to support this channel. Share with your friends to let me know that this is the type of content that you enjoy listening to, and it helps me like figure out what you guys like, and I can make more content in that area. But without further waiting, let's get on with this video. Okay, so the first thing I would like to talk about when it comes to like creating better characters is to try to create a profile for your characters. So for example, for me, I created like a profile list for my characters, and you can find that profile list at my author site. It's at www.jonahwauthor.com, and this is where I like created a list where I kind of like list down like some of the characters' main attributes, their strengths, their weaknesses, like what they hope to gain out of the story, as well as like what they may have to learn and what some of their like emotions may be, or their character traits, which is very important. And also I liked getting a visual idea of what my characters looked like, as well as like creating like a backstory bio for them. That way I like knew what type of characters I was working with before I started writing my manuscript, because you have to craft your characters beforehand. It's you can like let ideas come to you as you like write this character, but I would say you're gonna do yourself a big um advantage here if you like plan this out before you write your book. Okay, so the next thing I'd like to talk about, and it's kind of major, but your characters need to want something, and they need goals in your story, because if they don't have goals, they're just going to be meandering around for like 300, 400 pages, and we're going to easily like detach ourselves from these characters if we don't know exactly what their goals are. And also, when it comes to like making clear what the characters' goals are, is that we understand what they want in this story, and we kind of know what's driving them and driving their emotions, and that way we can somewhat care for what they're going through and care for what they're trying to achieve in the story. And that's very important, because if your characters have no goals, we're going to get bored with them, because we don't know what's driving them and what their motivations are throughout this whole novel. And this kind of feeds into the next point, and that is your characters need to like change from the beginning to the end personality, or like change their mindset from beginning to end, or they need to learn something by the end of the story. You don't want to walk in with your character like coming in a certain way, but then by the end of the story, they're exactly the same way. This mostly applies to like character driven stories. You don't want your character coming out of the story the exact same person as they came in, because then that means they went through no character arc, they didn't learn anything, and we don't understand the emotional journey that they went through. Now, this is different from like plot related or plot driven stories where the characters don't need the change. This is sort of like the James Bond type stories where like only the world changes around them, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about character driven stories where we're there to follow this character and their emotional journey. And if they make no changes along the way, or the changes are meaningless and they don't affect the story or affect this character overall, we're not going to care, and we're going to disattach ourselves, because we went on this emotionless journey because the character didn't learn anything and they're exactly the same as the beginning. So what was the point of them going through some of the things in the story if they didn't learn anything out of it? Okay, so the next thing I would like to talk about, and we're still in the standalone books, but this can also apply in the series as well, and that is to make your characters struggle throughout the story. Like you can make them like struggle emotionally, or have them struggle from external like forces trying to keep them from their goal, because Remember, your character has a goal. They have motivations. They're trying to get something out of this by the end of the story, but there's obstacles. It could be internal or external that's preventing them from reaching these goals, or they could find out that their motivations have been a lie, or they find out that it's not actually what they needed. It was just something that they wanted. So you need to like make your character struggle, because if you do, then us the readers are going to sympathize more for them, seeing them struggle and beaten down by like the world around them or by themselves because they have internal conflict. But you also want to like make them struggle, because if you want to have a resolution at the end of your story, you need to make them struggle. Otherwise, we're going to care less if they reach their goals by the end. If they just kind of like lackadaisically like got everything they wanted so easily, because I'm going to be way more invested in your characters if they get to their goal through struggles and they had to like overcome like internal conflict or external conflict to reach that goal, rather than them like, well, we planned something out from the beginning and everything went exactly as planned and now I have the goal. That's going to be a little boring and a little predictable. Okay, so the next tip I would like to talk about how to make better characters, and this sort of bugs me with a few books that I read last year, and I read a lot of them, but nobody is perfect, and it's okay to make your characters like not perfect at the beginning of the book, because remember, they're going through a character arc and they're going to have to change or learn by the end. So they can become perfect as much as you want them to be by the end, but don't start them out perfect, because then you leave little room for them to grow. And or you're going to have to like come up with contrived ways to make them have flaws throughout the story if you start them out too perfect. Because I know like you've been working with these characters for a long time and you just want a lot of people to like them, but making them perfect is not going to make us like them any more than if you started them out with some flaws. Because if you make them perfect from beginning to end, like I'm going to pretty much like them less, because number one, I'm not going to be invested in their journey because they're just perfect at everything and they're always going to make the right choices and everything. And second, like I know that people like this don't exist in real life. I'm not like this, so I can't relate to this character, and I'm going to get to that in the next tip. So we can't relate to this character, and three, it's just kind of boring and it's going to be predictable because we just know that the character is going to make all the right choices and everything's going to go according to plan, and no matter what happens, they're just going to be this perfect character. So don't be afraid to have your character have flaws. It's okay for them to be like not that good of a person at the beginning if they learn from that. Now if they don't learn, then you have a problem. But like making them perfect just so we can like them, like that's not the best thing to go about. Now you can probably try to make this work that there's an illusion that they're perfect, but they have flaws, but you need to make those flaws pretty apparent and not like think of them later in the story and just throw them in there just to make your character have some flaws. Now, some flaws that I don't consider like real character flaws is like making that your character is like shy or maybe like a little timid if they go to school for the first time. For me, I don't think that's like a real character flaw, because let's face it, all of us are like nervous or shy when put in certain situations. That's really not a flaw. Like, I'll say a flaw is more like maybe you're a little bit arrogant, or maybe you go to school and you view that everyone like doesn't want to talk to you, so you just like view the world as like a bad place and you just paint everyone out to be the villain and you as the victim. I consider that more of a flaw, because that's more of like your choice to believe that and you're kind of believing a lie. Whereas being shy, yeah, it's a minor flaw, but I wouldn't say that's a flaw that can carry your story, because I feel like every person can like be shy when it comes to like certain situations that make them uncomfortable. Plus, that's just such a broad spectrum and like an overused trope where like it's gonna come off as very generic. So those are the two differences between like those two flaws and what I view as like a real character flaw. So yeah, that's gonna conclude that point. So basically, don't make your characters perfect, in the beginning and leave no room for them to grow, where they're just perfect at the end, because that's boring. Okay, so the next thing I would like to talk about, and this is another important tip, and this kind of ties into the first one, and this is why certain books have like too perfect of characters, is that people tend to confuse like having likable characters with relatable and understandable characters. Now, it's fine to have likable characters, but the thing is, what about if you're writing an antagonist point of view, or your protagonist is like an anti-hero or a villain? You're trying to show their point of view. Like, the thing isn't to make them like make your characters just fully likable, especially not at the beginning. Like, yeah, you want us to like them and like care about their story and care about what they're going through, but the thing is, the main important thing is make them relatable. Like, okay, what are they going through emotionally? Like, how do they view the world? Like, how are they struggling? Like, what is driving them? Like, maybe some of the things that they do in life isn't good. Like, maybe a character like bullies people like all the time at the beginning of the story. Like, yeah, it doesn't make us like them, but like maybe you could go a little bit more in depth in this character and find out why is he doing it. Maybe because he has a grudge against the world, or it's the only way he can like show that he has strength because everyone underestimates him. Okay, so that's understandable. So now we have a way to understand this character and maybe find him relatable. So the main goal here, yes, you can make your characters likable, but the main goal isn't to make your characters likable. It's make them understandable and like relatable. That way we care about these characters, because just being likable, yeah, that can make us like the characters, but the thing is, that's not going to carry us throughout the whole story. We need to like understand them and be relatable. So yeah, because if you care too much about making your characters likable, then you're going to be too fearful to give them flaws, or you're going to make them like make every right choice, and then you're going to fall into the trap of making your characters too perfect. Okay, so the next thing I would like to talk about before we get into like characters for a series, and that is to have your characters have traits, or character traits, or like unique traits from each other. So let's say you have a book with like 4 different protagonists, or maybe 1 main character and 3 side characters. You need to have your main character or your characters like have unique traits that can only be attributed to them. Like for me, for example, my main character always like speaks quickly, and sometimes like he moves and starts speaking with his hands when he gets nervous, or he like always rubs his face or rubs his forehead whenever he gets stressed. Sometimes he like tries to like be, I wouldn't say jokey, but like sort of like lighthearted, or he'll make sarcastic comments whenever they're in a dangerous situation to kind of like relieve his stress. So that's a unique trait to him, because you don't want all your characters to mesh together and be the same. As well as like the big thing is, you don't want your main character to come off as very generic with no unique traits, where then people read your book and they just forget about your character within the next few days, and they don't even remember a single thing about them because they were so generic and they had no special traits about them. So yeah, so make your characters have unique traits, because otherwise you're going to like have readers forget about your characters really quickly. Okay, so now that we talked about mainly how to make better characters in a standalone story, let's talk about how to make better characters and how to like improve on them like as a series. So the first thing you want to do is obviously leave room for them to grow as a person or emotionally by the end of the first book, because if you just like resolve all of their flaws and like don't set up like maybe potential new flaws or leave room for them to grow, you're going to have nowhere to go for these characters or character like as the series goes on, because then they're just going to be boring like after we were so invested in them in the first book, because yeah, they're going through the motions with the plot, but like nothing about them is changing, they're not affected emotionally, and we don't have new flaws for them to like get over. Which kind of feeds into the second point, is like don't repeat the plot or same character arcs where you have the character constantly relearning the same lesson book after book, because then your books are going to get very repetitive and it's going to get very predictable, and people are going to be disattached from your story if you continue to make your characters like learn the same lessons, or like they learn a lesson in the first book but then all of a sudden they decide to just conveniently forget everything they learned in the first book just so they have to relearn it again because you're just repeating the same character arc. And this kind of feeds into the sub point, and that is to introduce new challenges for your characters to overcome emotionally. I'm not talking just externally, but I'm talking like emotionally. This is the core point of your story, is to grab us and have us emotionally attached to these characters. You need to offer new challenges, like new lessons they need to learn or new flaws that they need to like overcome within themselves. Okay, so this feeds into the next sections, and that is to raise the stakes for your characters. Constantly raise those stakes where they're forced to grow even more. And this kind of like needs to happen because, like, yes, each book the characters want something new and have new goals in each book, but overall you need to raise the stakes. That way we can like overall see like what you're trying to do. Where's the character going from the beginning of the series to the end? Like, what type of person are they trying to transition to? Are they trying to like overall become a better person, or are they descending into a worse person by the end of the series? And by worse person, I mean like they kind of like turn into a villain, or like they're gonna be like pretty much lost because they're going the wrong direction. So we kind of need to raise the stakes, but also keep in mind that you need to have an overarching like character arc. Like, where is this character going? What are you trying to like do with this character? Like, where they, like how are they going to change from the beginning of the series all the way to the end? So another thing that you can do to make sure that your characters are better, or you keep them in place over a series, is to write notes every time you write some struggle or character moments down. You need to keep this in record. That way you know to set up certain challenges that they may face, set up certain flaws, as well as like stay consistent with the characters. And like, especially if you want to like maintain their character traits, you need to write it all down and like kind of like keep a record. That way your book doesn't drift along, and then all of a sudden the main character doesn't feel like the character you remember from the first book. So I would heavily encourage, write down notes about your character. And if you are going to like make your character like appear to be a good guy for the first half of the series, but then descend into villainy and become a villain by the end, you have to make sure that you write down notes that you're going to be doing that big twist at the second half of the series, but then set it up throughout the previous books. That way it doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It makes it like, well, you were sitting one day and you just had this brilliant idea that came in your head, but you just wrote it down and didn't really plan this out. And this next point kind of feeds into like a point I made last week, where I said like usually in a trilogy the second book is where most challenges kind of like come through, and maybe like the good guys don't get their way, but throw everything in the kitchen sink at your characters during the middle book or middle section of the books before that climax or the ending, if you're going to make them triumphant. Because the thing is, like, you need to introduce like all the challenges that you have and like really beat your character down. That way we see them at their lowest point and we see how they learn and grow out of this horrible time, and that way we care as they like overcome these challenges and rise back up to ultimately win at the end of the book or get to their end goal at the end of this series. So the last thing I would like to talk about, well, there's a couple things I would like to talk about, but one of the things is that make sure your character has a goal or something to do or something to learn in every single book along the way. Yes, you're trying to like make a long character arc here, but make sure that each book has its own character growth. That way it doesn't feel like a filler book, or we just get emotionally detached from a character because it doesn't feel like they're growing or they don't want anything or nothing significant is happening with their character along the way. And for the final point I would like to make in this video is there's no such thing as like too much planning for your characters beforehand, before you write your book. There's no such thing as too much planning. Like for me, it took me like 3 months to plan out my main character and kind of decide where he was going from the first book that I released all the way to the final book, which I'll be writing in a couple of years or a few years down the road. Like, I have to plan that out because this is like a very important thing, and if I want people to stick with me throughout my whole series, I need to make sure that my characters are relatable and understandable. Yes, they can be likable, but the most important thing is they need to be relatable and understandable. That way we can get emotionally attached to them and understand what they're going through and what their goals are and what they're pursuing. Okay, so that's going to conclude this video on how to make better characters. This was a hard video to make because I really wanted to make sure that I offered like the proper tips and everything, because this is very important in order to like keep your readers' attention. Like for me, yes, and a lot of readers, like we do care about the plot, and sometimes your plots are very exciting, but the thing is, what about when the action stops or like the plot needs to take a rest for a section and we need to zone in on these characters? Well, if you don't have good characters, we're not going to stick around very long, and these character moments are going to fall flat, or we're just not going to care. And we may not care if you're trying to make a series and we don't care about the characters, because you can't rely on the plot to do everything for you unless you're writing a plot driven story. But right now we're talking about like character driven stories, and your characters need to really carry the plot and carry your readers through this plot. So that's going to conclude this video. If you like more videos from this Journey to the Publication series, feel free to like and subscribe to let me know that these are videos that you really enjoy. And just remember that I post every Tuesday and Thursday, and maybe a couple videos like around those days, just to give some updates or anything like that. But without any further talking, I'll see you next time. Happy writing and good day.